The story opens in a high school locker room where Robbie, a chubby and awkward student, enjoys a rare moment of peace in the shower. Believing he's safe, he lets his guard down, only for a group of bullies to ambush him. They seize him without warning and drag him, struggling, into the gymnasium, where the final school assembly is in full swing. Wearing nothing but humiliation, Robbie vowed that day to transform himself. Fueled by years of ridicule, he made it his life's mission to become the ultimate alpha, a force to be reckoned with, a walking nightmare for every bully who had ever dared to laugh at him. In the gym, Joyner, better known as the Golden Jet, stands at the pinnacle of his high school glory. Charismatic, accomplished, and adored, he's moments away from receiving the coveted Student of the Year award. The crowd roars in admiration, the energy electric. But just as the ceremony reaches its peak, chaos erupts, shattering the perfect moment in an instant. The doors burst open, and in an instant, all eyes turn. Robbie Weirdick, humiliated and completely exposed, is thrown onto the stage for all to see. Gasps ripple through the crowd, followed by a wave of laughter. The once celebratory atmosphere twists into a spectacle of embarrassment, sealing a moment that will haunt Robbie forever. The cheers instantly morph into uproarious. Amid the chaos, Kelvin's confident smile falters, his moment of triumph overshadowed by the cruel spectacle unfolding before him. But while everyone else revels in Robbie's embarrassment, Kelvin acts without hesitation. Stepping forward, he shrugs off his bomber jacket and gently drapes it over Robbie's shoulders, offering him a shred of dignity in a moment of utter disgrace. The laughter begins to fade as Robbie, now shielded by Kelvin's simple act of kindness, scrambles off the stage, desperate to escape the humiliation. A hush settles over the gym, the weight of the moment sinking in. Kelvin, without a word, returns to the podium, his quiet gesture leaving an impression on everyone in the room, especially Robbie. Fast forward 20 years, and Kelvin's life is far from the bright future everyone once predicted. No longer the Golden Jet, he's now just another accountant, buried in spreadsheets and routine. The confidence that once defined him has faded, replaced by quiet frustration as he watches his coworkers climb the corporate ladder while he remains stuck in place. At lunch with his wife, Maggie, his high school sweetheart, he forces a smile, but deep down, he wonders if this is all life has to offer. Kelvin watches as his colleagues celebrate a promotion at a nearby table, their laughter and clinking glasses only deepening his sense of inadequacy. The once golden boy now feels like an afterthought, stuck in a life that never quite lived up to expectations. Sensing his mood, Maggie tries to lift his spirits, excitedly showing off the dress she's planning to wear for their upcoming 20-year reunion. But Kelvin hesitates, avoiding her gaze. Finally, with a reluctant sigh, he admits the truth. He doesn't want to go.
Me, not going.
Frustrated, Maggie sighs and tells Kelvin that his negativity is starting to wear down their relationship. She reminds him that the reunion is a chance to reconnect, to celebrate how far they've come. But Kelvin just can't shake the feeling that he hasn't come far at all. Back at work, he sits at his desk, scrolling aimlessly through Facebook, looking for anything to take his mind off his frustrations. Just as he's about to close the app, a friend request pops up from someone named Bob Stone, a name he doesn't recognize.
Bob Stone.
Curious, he clicks on the profile. The name doesn't ring a bell, but curiosity gets the better of Kelvin, and he clicks accept. Almost immediately, a message pops up. Buddy, long time no see. We should catch up. Kelvin hesitates, exchanging a few polite messages. But as the conversation unfolds, something strange happens. Bob seems to know a lot about their high school days. Then, it clicks. Bob Stone is actually Robbie Weirdick, the same Robbie who was humiliated at their senior assembly, the same Robbie Kelvin once saved with a simple act of kindness. But as Kelvin stares at Bob's profile picture, he realizes Robbie isn't the awkward, chubby kid he once knew. He's changed a lot. Kelvin agrees to meet that evening. When he tells Maggie, she's skeptical but eventually recalls Robbie and lets him go. At the pub that night, Kelvin is met by a towering, muscular man radiating confidence, Bob Stone.
It's me, Bob.
What?
Kelvin can't believe his eyes. This can't possibly be the same Robbie Weirdick who was once humiliated in front of the entire school. As they catch up, Bob casually mentions he used to work as a federal contractor but was recently let go. The two laugh, reminisce, and bond over old memories, until Bob steps away to grab drinks, leaving Kelvin alone at the table. Moments later, another man tries to take Bob's seat. Kelvin, trying to avoid trouble, attempts to resolve the situation diplomatically. But when Bob returns, the mood shifts dramatically. The stranger sizes him up, unimpressed.
Those gym muscles aren't scaring anybody.
Well,
Without hesitation, Bob springs into action, effortlessly beating the man senseless before anyone can react. Kelvin barely has time to process what's happening before Bob grabs him and rushes them out of the pub. Still in shock, Kelvin stares at him, adrenaline pumping.
Bob, that was amazing. I've never seen anything like that. You played like this. I didn't know you could fight in a unicorn shirt.
He blurts out, half in awe, half in disbelief. Bob just grins. Without explaining, he leads Kelvin toward their old high school. As they walk through the familiar halls, nostalgia and unresolved emotions flood back. Bob pauses, reflecting on the trauma of his public humiliation, while Kelvin, caught in the moment, opens up about his frustrations, how he never lived up to the golden future everyone once expected of him. Sensing the weight of their conversation, Bob decides to lighten the mood. With a mischievous grin, he claps Kelvin on the back, the legendary backflip.
Golden Jet! I'm not gonna stop until you do the Golden Jet flip!
Encouraged by Bob's enthusiasm, Kelvin takes a deep breath and gives it a try. But the years have taken their toll. His attempt goes hilariously wrong, sending him crashing to the ground in a spectacular, embarrassing wipeout. Bob bursts into laughter, and despite the pain, Kelvin can't help but chuckle too. The night continues at Kelvin's house, where the two share drinks and reminisce. In the middle of their conversation, Bob casually brings up a small parole issue he needs help with. Confused but trying to be polite, Kelvin agrees to take a look. But when he checks the laptop, what he finds is far more concerning: offshore accounts containing millions of dollars. Before Kelvin can react, Bob's attempt to explain is cut short as he accidentally spills beer all over the laptop, sending sparks flying and shutting it down instantly.
So sorry. Oh, man.
The laptop fries, but Bob just shrugs it off and asks to crash at Kelvin's place. Reluctantly, Kelvin agrees. The next morning, a loud knock jolts Kelvin awake. At the door stands a team of CIA agents, led by the tough Agent Harris. They barge in, demanding to know where Bob is. Kelvin insists Bob stayed the night, but after searching the house, Bob is nowhere to be found. Then comes the shock. Harris reveals Bob is wanted for treason, murder, and stealing classified information to sell to enemy nations. Kelvin is speechless when Harris adds, on official documents. Panicking Kelvin denies knowing anything, realizing he's been pulled into something far more dangerous than he could have imagined.
Is not my friend.
You are the only person he listed in his personal references.
At work, Calvin gets an unexpected call from Bob, who casually mentions he's hiding somewhere in the building. Calvin, panicked and desperate to distance himself from the chaos, immediately alerts the CIA.
In the stairwell, 2 flights down. Alert Charlie team!
Agent Harris and her team storm the office, but Bob, as slippery as ever, outmaneuvers them with ease. Setting off the sprinklers, he creates a scene of pure chaos, soaking everyone and turning the office into a waterlogged war zone. Before Calvin can slip away, Bob confronts him.
Are you in or are you out?
He demands. Calvin, drenched in frantic, insists he wants nothing to do with whatever this is. Bob, undeterred, declares that Calvin's already in too deep. With dramatic flair, Bob ignites a tie tied to the sprinkler system, triggering another round of alarms and pandemonium. In the midst of the madness, Bob tackles Calvin, declaring him a hostage as Calvin flails helplessly. The CIA agents burst in, leading to an all-out shootout with Bob. Calvin tries to crawl to safety but ends up hilariously tangled in a mail cart, becoming an accidental participant in the chaos. Bob takes down several agents with impressive skill, but the tide turns when one agent manages to wrap a chain around his neck. Desperate, Bob yells to Calvin for help. Calvin, now holding a gun he has no idea how to use, accidentally fires it. To his shock and Bob's relief, the shot hits the agent, freeing Bob before the CIA can recover. Bob knocks out another agent, throws Calvin into a postcard, and charges toward the exit. Just as they're about to escape, Agent Harris and her team block their path. Calvin, still hoping to salvage some sense of normalcy, attempts to negotiate. Harris cuts him off, insisting he turn himself in. Bob, ever resourceful, triggers the sprinklers again and tosses a flash bomb, disorienting the agents. With a dramatic leap, he and Calvin crash through a window, landing on an inflatable gorilla outside. Amid a hail of gunfire, the pair scrambles into an Uber and speeds away. Calvin, still processing the insanity of the last few minutes, demands answers. Bob, calm as ever, explains that the stolen encryption keys are part of a U.S. spyware system capable of compromising national security. Bob insists as if this is the most obvious thing in the world. Calvin, however, is less than convinced. He demands Bob turn himself in, but Bob reminds him that they're both now considered fugitives and need to clear their names first. Frustrated, Calvin grills Bob about Harris' accusations, pointing out that she claimed Bob stole the codes. Bob denies it, explaining that he and his partner Phil were tracking the notorious Black Badger during a mission. According to Bob, Phil was killed in an elevator explosion, and Harris framed him for both Phil's death and the missing codes. Before Calvin can fully process this wild story, their Uber ride takes a sharp sharp turn, literally a motorcyclist slams into the window, striking Bob in the face with a spinning tire. Bob, unfazed, retaliates by throwing a metal pipe into the bike's wheels, sending the rider flying. While Bob deals with the chaos, Calvin seizes the opportunity to escape on the motorbike. Calvin shouts over his shoulder, leaving Bob to handle the rest of the fight solo. Calvin, desperate for normalcy, calls Maggie and urges her to meet him at their therapist's office instead of going home. Maggie immediately notices something is off. Before Calvin can explain, Agent Harris shows up,
Get in.
forcing him into a van for questioning. Harris accuses Bob of being the Black Badger, claiming he betrayed his partner to steal the code. However, she admits that Calvin's cooperation is crucial since Bob clearly trusts him. Calvin reluctantly agrees to help, armed with a tracking device. Calvin is sent into the field to lure Bob out of hiding. At the therapist's office, Calvin's plan takes an awkward turn when Bob unexpectedly joins the session, playing along with the therapy games. Bob dives into the role with enthusiasm, much to Calvin's horror. Tension builds as Calvin tries to keep Maggie from suspecting anything, but his growing frustration gets the better of him. Calvin finally snaps. Maggie mistakes his outburst for a lack of commitment to their marriage. Heartbroken, she storms out, leaving Calvin devastated and more entangled in Bob's chaos than ever. After Maggie storms out, Bob convinces Calvin to help him, assuring him that he's fighting for the right cause. Reluctantly, Calvin agrees and the two decide to track down Trevor, Bob's high school bully who may have access to critical transaction details. First, Trevor greets them with a polite and almost apologetic demeanor. He even offers a half-hearted apology to Bob for how he treated him in the past. But the act doesn't last long. Trevor's smirk returns as he mockingly admits he hasn't changed at all. He doubles down on his insults, reveling in his past cruelty. Bob, visibly shaken by the encounter, shuts down and walks away without a word. Calvin, however, isn't about to let Trevor off the hook. He confronts Trevor, chastises him for his behavior, and manages to retrieve the transaction number himself. On the way out, Calvin receives a call from Agent Harris, who delivers an ultimatum: turn Bob in or Maggie will be charged with conspiracy. Outside, Bob apologizes to Calvin, admitting that Calvin was the only person who ever treated him with kindness. He promises never to betray Calvin, but guilt overwhelms Calvin and he confesses that he's already given their location to Harris. Within moments, the CIA arrives, capturing both Bob and Calvin. While restrained, Calvin is consumed with regret as he hears Harris interrogating and torturing Bob at a secret facility. Unable to stomach the betrayal, Calvin takes matters into his own hands. He overpowers an agent, grabs a weapon and forces his way into Bob's room. Inside, Calvin frees Bob and subdues Harris, who warns Calvin that he's making a huge mistake. Despite the warning, Calvin stands firm, determined to do what he believes is right. As they escape, Bob seems shaken and begins doubting himself. He insists he's just Robbie the Tool and denies being a spy. Calvin confronts him, reminding Bob that his self-made persona, Bob Stone, isn't just a mask, it's who he's become, drawing a parallel to his own nickname, Golden Jet. Calvin encourages Bob to own his identity and rise above his past. The pep talk works and Bob finds his resolve. They shake hands, but Calvin notices Bob's fractured finger, a silent reminder of the risks they've taken. The two work together to escape, with Calvin unexpectedly taking out several agents along the way, even surprising himself. He quips before quickly realizing he's committing serious crimes when a stolen keycard fails to work. Bob calmly handles the problem by holding an agent at gunpoint to force their way out. They steal a vehicle and Bob hands Calvin a phone, instructing him to input the transaction codes into a map. The data leads them to Boston, but they need a plane to get there. At a private airstrip, Calvin distracts a security guard with a hilariously overcomplicated story, while Bob sneaks into the hangar and pulls a plane onto the runway. As they take off, Calvin begins piecing things together and voices his suspicion that Agent Harris might actually be the Black Badger. When they land, the designated meeting location seems too exposed. Calvin spots an underground parking garage nearby and deduces that the trade must be happening there. Bob suggests they split up, but Calvin refuses, insisting they stay in contact in case things go sideways.
Here, is something happening up here? What am I supposed to do, Bob? How do I get your attention?
Bob enters the parking garage and it's clear the criminals are expecting him. Meanwhile, Calvin, trying to be stealthy, spots Harris arriving on the scene, convinced she's the Black Badger. Calvin follows her, but quickly gets caught up in the chaos. But just as the deal seems to be proceeding, the shocking truth is revealed. Phil, Bob's supposedly dead partner, steps out of the shadows grinning. He declares himself the real Black Badger. Calvin arrives at the worst possible moment, finding both Bob and Phil accusing each other of being the traitor.
I am the Black Badger. I'm the Black Badger.
Before anyone can make sense of the situation, Harris bursts in, guns blazing, and chaos erupts. Calvin ducks behind cover, clutching the drives as bullets fly in every direction. Amid the chaos, Calvin makes a break for it as if his life depends on it. Because it does, a buyer pursues him in a car, but Bob swoops in, narrowly rescuing Calvin in the nick of time.
Right? Stay the hell away from me, Bob! You shot me in the neck!
As Calvin keeps running, he ends up cornered on a bridge, where the final showdown begins. Bob and Phil confront Calvin, each desperately trying to convince him of their innocence. Calvin, caught between the two and holding the fate of the mission in his hands, he must decide who to trust. A chaotic shootout erupts, with Calvin caught in the crossfire. In a panic, he accidentally shoots Bob, horrified. Calvin tries to aim at Phil, but his gun clicks empty. Phil, smug as ever, taunts Calvin, calling Bob too weak to ever be the Black Badger. He proudly recounts how he faked his death and framed Bob for everything, savoring his villainous monologue like he's auditioning for a spy movie. Phil orders Calvin to kneel, clearly enjoying his moment of power, desperate and out of options. Calvin attempts his infamous golden jet flip as a last-ditch distraction. Predictably, the flip goes hilariously wrong, leaving Calvin sprawled on the ground, but the stunt gives Bob just enough of an opening, summoning his strength. Bob takes down Phil in brutal fashion, even ripping out his trachea, before tossing him unceremoniously into the river. With the crisis finally resolved, Bob and Calvin hand the encryption drives over to Agent Harris. Surprisingly, she thanks them for their service, even suggesting Calvin consider a career with the CIA. Calvin, still processing the chaos, gives her a half-hearted laugh, clearly unsure if she's joking. At the high school reunion, Maggie confronts Calvin, demanding answers about his recent bizarre behavior. Before Calvin can stammer out an explanation, Bob steps in, charming Maggie with his humor and even joking about bringing their therapist to the event. Calvin, now more confident, tells Maggie that she's the reason he's happy with his life and that nothing else matters, moved by his honesty. Maggie smiles and they share a heartfelt kiss. Inside the gym, the prom king and queen are announced to everyone's surprise. Bob is crowned prom king. Stunned, he hesitates for a moment, clearly overwhelmed. Of course, Trevor, still clinging to his bully persona after 20 years, seizes the opportunity to mock Bob in front of everyone. But this time Bob doesn't cower. With a confident stride, he punches Trevor square in the face, knocking him out cold. Bob takes the microphone and delivers an emotional speech, thanking Calvin for helping him accept himself and reminding everyone that it's never too late to embrace who you truly are. The crowd erupts in applause. In a moment of self-liberation, Bob removes his clothes, standing proudly in front of the entire room. But instead of the ridicule he once feared, Bob is met with cheers and admiration. The gym, once the site of his greatest humiliation, becomes the stage for his ultimate redemption. To top it all off, Bob reconnects with his high school crush, who flirts with him and seals the moment with a kiss. Months later, Calvin and Maggie prepare for their growing family, with Maggie visibly pregnant. Outside their home, Bob arrives to wish Calvin luck on his first day with the CIA. As a token of their friendship, Bob hands Calvin his old high school blazer, a symbol of how far they've both come. The film ends with Calvin and Bob driving off into the sunset, their unlikely friendship stronger than ever. It's the perfect mix of absurdity and heartfelt connection, proving that even the strangest bonds can be the most meaningful. Kindly subscribe to my channel for more movie recap. See you on the next one.